Hi guys, today we're going to talk about trade publishing. I don't know which sectors you have finished already, but you do know that in the South African publishing industry, it's made up of 3 sectors, including trade publishing, educational publishing, and then academic publishing. Most of the time, your scholarly publishing, that's like books and things published and journals published by your university presses, usually they are included with the academic publishing sector. Right, but today we're going to focus on trade publishing. By now you guys already know that trade publishing is when you publish books for leisure reading. It's for relaxation, escapism. It's not necessarily something that is published for educational purposes, although you can learn from it, but it is not prescribed by the Department of Education or the university. So it's really when people buy these kinds of books to relax, leisure reading. And because we are now focusing on trade publishing, we also need to consider who the target audience is, and as we said before, that's the general reader, the general man on the street, the general consumer. This is basically anyone who has a disposable income who would like to go to a shop and then, buy a few books. The problem with that is that your market is very difficult to gauge or to estimate because you have so many genres that you're offering, and obviously then your market gets divided. So you have adult fiction and you have adult non-fiction. You have children's fiction and children's non-fiction. And now we also have new age groups that are emerging, like young adult and new adult. New adult is actually the one after young adult, and young adult is not necessarily your teens anymore. It's someone who is a little bit older than that. But that has really sparked a lot of interest among young readers as well as the publishing industry, whereas they actually now have a genre or a group of books that are basically aimed at the young adults or then the new adults. But it's important that you guys just realize that you have 2 sets of books in trade publishing, which is fiction. These books, as you remember from first semester, are based on an author's imagination. It's not based on facts, it's not the truth. Whereas with non-fiction, it just says basically, so it's not fiction, non-fiction. Those are usually things that are based on people's real life, facts, statistics, but it's true, it's not made up. Alright, then with the children you have the same thing. We do have to divide these things in age groups. So with children you have fiction, which is your normal, these are your normal storybooks. Non-fiction are also things like 10 facts about crocodiles, understanding math, and even though it's educational content, it's more presented in an entertaining way than an educational prescribed way, if that makes sense. And as we say, with new age groups emerging as well, but usually anyone under the age of 20 or 21 would fall under children still, under the children's and youth section. Now, what about religious books? Because we have fiction, we have non-fiction, but we do actually have a very strong religious section as well, or a religious genre in South Africa as well. If you think about what are those books? Kum, and the other one, was it Gospel Diary? I can't even remember. All right, so your religious books. And just to give you a few examples, I don't know how many of you are familiar with these authors like Francine Rivers, Karen Kingsbury, Joyce Meyer. The 2 on the left are fiction, so those are novels. And the other one on the right is more a non-fiction novel where they talk about how to hear from God. It's instructional, etc., etc. So, and a lot of these evangelists and Christians from the UK and US are quite popular, especially the US. They are quite popular in South Africa, and a lot of the publishers actually translate them into Afrikaans and English, for the South African market. But what's interesting about the religious books as well is that they also have their adult fiction and non-fiction. With adult fiction, what has really happened over the last few years, which is very, very interesting, is exactly the fact that they are mimicking a lot of those genres that are available in the normal general trade, secular kind of environment. So it's interesting, and what really makes a religious book, because it's still fiction, anyone can read the story, but usually it has to have a strong underlying Christian or religious foundation in the book. So either via the setting or via the characters who are very religious, or they are confronted with problems, etc., etc. So how do you really know when it's a religious book and not? And that's how you basically tell it apart. Interestingly, also, there are some of these books that actually cross over. So they are available in the normal trade market, secular market, as well as in the Christian market. So it's interesting. Some of these titles, especially when it comes to fiction, can overlap. It's not necessarily overtly Christian or overtly religious. So these are books that can actually still be read, without anyone being offended or confronted with religious beliefs that they're not necessarily agree with. So yes, but it's very niche in the sense that people who go to CUM and people who go to Gospel Direct and look for certain books, they know exactly what to expect, and they know if they go and buy their books there, the Christian principles will be portrayed in the books. Whereas when you just buy normal trade fiction, you wouldn't necessarily know what you're getting, right? So if you are really religious and you would like to read these kind of books, then go to the bookstores or the publishers who actually create and sell them. It's really a big market in South Africa, and as I just said, fiction has developed to include various popular genres. It's not just to say it's a historical romance or it's a this or it's a that. They actually included some even paranormal and even some fantasy aspects in their fiction novels as well. As I said, the UK and US imports, they are actually a huge, well, I would say a threat, but basically our main market is dominated by these imported UK and US imports, and there are a lot of translations. So, for example, Francine Rivers writes in English, but you can see in an Afrikaans translation, echo in die duisternis, an echo in the darkness. So, yes, that's actually a big translation market, which is very interesting. As we said, if we go back to the normal secular trade fiction area, we can look at international competition. You guys by now know how important this is, and you know that we do face a lot of international competition from bestsellers. Also, a lot of these multinational companies can produce a lot of books at a cheaper rate or a cheaper price. So it's easy for them with our exchange rate and rand value, etc., to export their books to us. And because we're also an English speaking colony, we actually can read their books as well. And there are a lot of also English multinationals in our country, trade publishing houses like Penguin Random House, etc., etc. So we do need to think about the international competition in our country as well, especially in trade fiction. I mean, if I just speak to you guys, most of you guys have read international fiction and very few local fiction, even if it's in English. So getting to the point where we talk about language of a publication determines the audience of the publication and is related to social and political factors. Very important. So as I just mentioned, in English, we were the colonization with the British. Obviously, we have strong English ties. English and Afrikaans developed Afrikaans also developed throughout the years. And those are the two languages that we publish in the most. Remember when we discussed the pest factors with the political factors as well, where language was definitely an issue, and where Afrikaans to a certain extent is today still associated with the language of the oppressor and apartheid, because it was during that time that the Afrikaner ideals were actually promoted, and also publishing flourished at that time. So, and then English has always been one of the strong languages in the country, not just because of that, but because of colonialization. And we only became a Republic of South Africa, if I'm not wrong, in 1961 or 62. Afrikaans as a language has only been declared an official language in 1925, which is actually very, very recent if you think about it. So when we think about African languages once again in South Africa, obviously your language will determine your audience of the publication. And all of these things have specific social and political factors that we also need to consider. So just a few interesting facts about language. I don't know how many of you guys know this, but isiZulu is our most spoken home language in South Africa. So it's not to say that they cannot speak English, it's just to say that these are the preferred methods that they, of home languages. So isiZulu is 25.35%. If you think of a population of 57 to 59 million people in South Africa, 25% of them speak Zulu as a home language, whereas isiXhosa is 40.8, Afrikaans 12.2, Setswana is 9.10, English is only 8.10%. So it's interesting because everywhere you go, you hear people speak English. But remember, English can be their second or third or even fourth language, whereas home language is their preferred mother tongue or, native speaking tongue. So it's interesting if you look at these statistics, because this really does tell us something about the language division in South Africa. Yet, we only publish, not only, but we mostly publish English and Afrikaans trade. There are reasons for that. So there are definitely power imbalances where people would say, yes, but the language policy is supposed to have all of the publishers publish the languages equally. The problem with this is as well is you need a market. You guys now know by this time that we are a business. As publishers, we run businesses. It's supply and demand, basic business principles. If we supply them with something and there's no demand, then obviously it will not sell. So there is this debate going on about whether we should cultivate indigenous language publishing, and then on the other hand, publishers may be saying, but okay, we do publish in this language, but what if there's no audience? A lot of African language speakers, and I'm repeating myself now, but a lot of African language speakers in a lot of respects actually prefer to read in English and write in English. So it's also a cultural issue in the sense that you publish what people will read. If the group will tell you, listen, we are not going to read books in isiZulu, then why publish it? All right, but there's also the chicken and egg debate about, but maybe they don't read it because there are no books available in their mother tongue. Whereas, other people would say you have to create the demand. For children, it's a little bit different. Adult fiction, yes, that's where the problem comes in, because at a certain age, some of the African language speakers just go over to English and then they stick with English. Whereas we still believe in mother tongue education. So basically, a lot of the children's books at schools are published in their African languages, and then at a certain point, it goes over to English. Whereas with trade, this is something that people buy out of free will, and they make the choice based on the variety of of content available. So a lot of people would also say for leisure reading and to cultivate a love for reading, and because it's possibly not everyone's culture to love reading and to love writing, etc., they say there need to be more books in the children's African languages in order to cultivate a love for reading. All right, there are a few of these organizations like Nali Bali. Please go and check it out. It is in your notes. That really have a lot of campaigns and drives towards getting parents to read with children, getting children to love reading, breaking down once again that stereotype of only certain people can read or certain people would like to read. But it is important that you guys remember language, and I'm going to say this over and over and over again until you get to third year again, but language, unfortunately, is tied to politics and social and economic divisions and circumstances. Once you understand that, you will also understand what it is that you need to do as a publisher, what you need to publish, and what will work and what will not work. So that's why I ask that question. What is then the publisher's role? Is it our role actually to publish books in as many languages as possible, to basically supply books and create a demand, or should we only supply where there is a demand? Considering the fact that we are businesses, but also kind of balancing our business objectives, making money, with our social objective, which is we want to be people that actually provide information in all the languages, inspire people to read, cultivate a love for reading in their own language. So it depends on the kind of company that you are, your social and business objectives, but it is important things that